morning, viewers. Good morning, St. Lucia. Welcome to another session of the Senate as they meet today, the 11th day of August, and that is following the session by the lower house on Tuesday, where they debated many bills were laid and a number of papers were laid. But this time the Senate is, of course, doing more or less the same thing. They will be laying some papers, but the difference between that's Tuesday and today is that only one bill that will be laid, and that is the special prosecutor bill. Right here in the chamber, we have the leader of government business who is present. We also see Senator Pauline Prosper, who is the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education. Also, Senator Lucia is here as well. We see Senator, the other senator, I'm going to get her name in a while, and then Senator Alvina Reynolds. We also have the two independent senators who are also present here, as well as there is Senator Fede and Senator, I have seen Senator Harold Stanislas from, on the opposition side. And look, I've been told that at today's sitting, you may notice the ladies on the government side wearing an orange, what do you call this? on the chest, on the shoulder, chest, that is. Yo ka service à m'a dit ça en créole, c'est madame là à ce façade gouvernement ka porter yoni asio en flair en orange avec ça, c'est pour montrer qui yo ka séparer, et puis c'est femme là qui ça nous a créé qui j'ai joué en chaque violence contre eux en temps pas tellement longtemps nous attendons chaque violence contre femmes en Sainte-Lucie avec eux qui a fait un statement aujourd'hui avec qui a commencé puis avec habillement yo ouais ça mutué et puis jaune qui a mutué violence parce que c'est pas jaune, excusez, c'est l'orange qui a mutué en violence contre femmes en particular. Alors aujourd'hui, you can find statement on Kaikon State. Like I said in Creole, I will say this one in English, that today the women on the government side are going to make a statement to demonstrate the intolerance for violence against women. In the recent past, we've heard a number of cases of women being murdered and those who are being raped, and lots of issues with women against women in St. Lucia, that is. And so there's the ladies on the government side. I have not seen the lady on the other side, that's the opposition side, Senator Polius. She's not here yet. I don't know if she will be a part of it, but definitely they're going to make that statement. Jodia, comme qui passait, ça c'est mardi. C'est comme ça qu'aille Sénat la fait, ça c'est deux chambres gouvernement, des niveaux. Ça c'est premier niveau, ça nous a créé lower house, côté c'est membres parlement qui gagne élection. Ils sont assis ensemble et puis qui a conduit par un speaker qui est consiste là. Ils ont joindre et puis ils ont passé loi là à niveau ça là. Avec deuxième niveau, c'est côté c'est Sénat là, ça c'est ces membres qui choisissent par premier ministre avec aussi gouverneur général avec façade opposition, chef façade opposition en tout il a fait l'année 5 à sous façade gouvernement, 3 à sous façade opposition et 2 qui indépendant qui choisit par gouverneur. Il can plutôt ratifier ça qui est discuté en premier niveau, ça c'est chambre c'est membre parlement qui électé. Ça y a fait aujourd'hui, il a créé en anglais upper house avec c'est un président qui a conduit session ça là, ça c'est un president of the Senate, honorable Stanley Felix, c'est lui qui a conduit nous beaucoup pour le moment, mais il c'est lui qui a conduit ça fait ici avec nous comme on a dit, yo en dedans en dernière session, ça c'est session mardi, yo parlé en chai en sous affaires special prosecutor, and there was a lot of discussion on the special prosecutor on Tuesday. In fact, there were other bills. In fact, some of the bills that were discussed on Tuesday was the income tax. That was not discussed, but the public debt management, security interest in movable property, and the special prosecutor bill. Obviously, the special prosecutor bill took a lot of attention and discussion. We actually left the chamber here at 9:30 thereabout on Tuesday. So we imagine that there will be lots and lots of discussion on this bill as well, because it's down on the order paper for today, and there will also be papers to be laid by the leader of government business. It's the statutory instrument number 22, legal profession eligibility, Douglas Leonard Men's order. There will also be the statutory instrument number 100 of 2022, excise tax amendment of Schedule 1, number 10 order, and by the honorable leader of government business also will move lay a paper in this chamber, the statutory instruments number 97 of 2022, immigration prohibition, prohibited immigrant order, and statutory instrument number 98 of 2022, passport fees amendment regulations. And he will also lay the paper statutory instrument number 99 of 2022, price control amendment order. So, and of course, like I said, this main discussion is going to be on the special prosecutor. And what is the special prosecutor? As was discussed on Tuesday in the lower house, it is basically the appointment of someone or someone in the legal profession, and that appointment will be made by the Legal Services Commission, who will appoint this person to investigate the acts of corruption and acts of malpractice and all of that over the years. It doesn't simply say, but as presented by Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre in the lower house on Tuesday, he said this special prosecutor is to encourage good governance, and that was promised by the St. Lucia Labour Party in the manifesto. So that means that the government had campaigned on that issue, ensuring that there was going to be, because the government there was going to be this appointment, and so it is no surprise that the government is moving in this direction. Comme on a dit en créole, Premier ministre là, ça c'est mardi, il pour mettre comme quoi qu'il la caille, il y a un gouvernement qui a appointé un avocat et bien un monde pour faire investigation en ça nous dit corruption. Ça c'est avec mal management, mal gouvernement, particulièrement finance pays. Avec le Premier ministre, il a été présenté Bill Salah m'a dit, il dit raison qui ça nécessaire, c'est pour faire assurer qu'il y a un bon gouvernement en pays, puisque s'il n'y a pas de gouvernement, s'il n'y a pas de bon gouvernement, pays qui a toujours souffert et la cagne en chaille souffrance, c'est raison qui fait de la panier en chaille bagaille gouvernement peut-être pour mettre pas ça chaîne pour mettre puisque toutes ces bagages ça n'a pas fait. Il aussi parlé à sur législation, ça c'est les mêmes de législation, c'est une loi pour faire assurer que gouvernement qui continue à faire un bon travail. So, nous avons préparé, comme on dit, pour session commencer. Il était pour commencer à 10h, mais il est capable que nous honorable Harold Stanislas qui a entré à présent. Et tout à l'heure, nous avons un commencement avec, comme on dit encore, nous avons préparé un statement pour passer madame là à ce façade gouvernement qui a dit en question à ces différents ces femmes en particulier les femmes qui j'ai mort et qui j'ai joint à violer avec bagaille violence contre eux en dit dans le gouvernement nous prendre une pause et quand nous dévirer nous parler à ce qui est passé en Caïconsit ici ça c'est une session sénète là pour jeudi 11 août l'année 2022.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thy unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one to another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of our God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Announcements. Good morning, Senators. I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the special prosecutor bill was passed in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Additionally, I beg to announce that His Excellency, the Governor General, has been pleased to assent the following bills: recording of court proceedings, the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission Agreement, the Youth Economy, and the Firearms Amendment. On a more solemn note, Senators, I would like to extend sincere condolences to the family and friends of former House of Assembly Speaker, Mr. Donald Alsey. Mr. Alsey served from August 1981 to June of 1982. As a mark of respect for his service, the flag at the Parliament has been flown at half-staff. On a more jubilant note this time, I would like to congratulate the athletic contingent who represented St. Lucia at the recently ended Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. More particularly, I'd like to congratulate Julian Alfred, who finished second in a time of 11.01 seconds, and who gained the silver medal in the women's 100 race. I extend a hearty congratulations. I do hope that in the not too distant future that she will replace the silver with gold. And the same goes to all of the other members of the St. Lucia athletic community and the contingent who represent us in Birmingham. So congratulations, one and all. Lastly, last but not least, let me extend a hearty welcome I think it's becoming customary because it's been going on for quite a while, all summer. Let me welcome students of political science from the University of Birmingham to this August chamber. I welcome you, students. I know that we spoke for a little while just a few minutes ago, hence the reason why we are starting a few minutes late. I want to tell you that we are very happy to have you here, and the Office of the Parliament remains open to assisting you with any issues that you may have as it relates to your assignment on the island. For myself, like I've told you, I will remain available to you whenever that you need me to. So thank you once again for attending, and we do hope that what we do here this morning will provide some kind of elucidation to you and will help you with your mission on island. So thank you very much. Statements from ministers. Papers to be laid. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Mr. President, before I proceed, may I beg your leave to join you in welcoming our guests, students from Birmingham University. I wish them well with their studies and their endeavors, and hope they enjoy the hospitality and warmth of our beautiful country. I also join you in congratulating the former Clerk of Parliament, Ms. Lindell Gustav, for her sterling contribution to our Parliament and our country, and wish her well in her retirement. I join you also in extending condolences to the family of former Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mr. Donald Alsey, and I also want to extend condolences to the family of Diane Theodore of Choiseul, who we all know the circumstances under which she lost her life recently. And also, Mr. President, I wish to join you in commending our very own Julian Alfred for capturing the silver medal, second only to the champion Olympic runner from Jamaica, Elaine Thompson, and her time, of course, been very, very impressive. I also want to compliment the 4x100 meter relay, men's relay team from St. Lucia, who also made the final of the 100 meters 4x1, which is in itself a very significant achievement for sprinting in our country, especially since we had 4 athletes who were able to keep up and make the final. So it's a step in the right direction for us, and I wish our sporting fraternity well. On to the papers, Mr. President. I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 96 of 2022, Legal Profession Eligibility Douglas Leonard Mendez Order. Statutory Instrument number 97 of 2022, Immigration Prohibited Immigrant Order. Statutory Instrument number 98 of 2022, Passport Fees Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument number 99 of 2022, Price Control Amendment number 12 Order. Statutory Instrument number 100 of 2022, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1 number 10 Order.
Bills. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to lay for first reading a bill shortly entitled Special Prosecutor.
Special Prosecutor.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that the Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I guess the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted, Honorable Leader of Government Business. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Special Prosecutor. Mr. President, today is, like it was on Tuesday of this week, a very historical and significant day in the lives of the people of St. Lucia, particularly the lives of public servants and others who serve this country. Mr. President, I wish to take us back a couple months ago, or 3 months or so, when the Prime Minister in his budget address of 2021-2022 announced and made reference to the issue of good governance being improved in this country and accentuated the intolerance of corruption or malpractice, particularly among public officers, including politicians. Mr. President, there's always been talk and mention of that type of behavior for decades, for as long as we have existed as a country, as a civil community. And many times there have been accusations and conversations about who may have done what. But very often the public and citizens become very frustrated that the conversation is had, the debates take place, the accusations are made, but there seems to be no action to follow up and address the perceived acts of whether it be corruption or malpractice, particularly in public office. Mr. President, that conversation seems to have become even more apparent in the last 5 years. And in some cases, it became a conversation that would be initiated by the average person on the street, not just those of us in public office, but the average St. Lucian that you speak to, almost suggesting that there needs to be some demonstration of intolerance actively set by those at the top. And in that regard, they refer to the leaders of this country. Mr. President, I think we need to also appreciate the symptoms or consequences of perceived corruption. And I say perceived because sometimes there may not necessarily have been any convictions or any particular charges, but the perception of corruption can also be very harmful to any country. And that is why it can be a means or a method or one of those attributes that can destabilize a country's social and economic infrastructure. That is why, Mr. President, perceived corruption can diminish or can affect the trust that investors and legitimate business people may have in our country. Mr. President, one of the symptoms of perceived corruption or corruption itself is that it could cripple the social infrastructure. It can cripple the ability of others who wish to accumulate wealth used through the legitimate means. Mr. President, it is also true that perceived corruption can impede or can affect the potential for a country to attract investment, and even as we know, ease of doing business and corruption indices are factors that are variables that are considered by investors, and these can seriously affect our ability to attract that kind of necessary investment or investors. Mr. President, our ability to attract grants and financial support and other forms of support for all of the necessary initiatives that we would want to take, and the level of confidence in the external environment, the external partners in our country, diplomatic allies and friends who may want to take an interest in assisting us. Once there is perceived corruption, that is a red light. And so, Mr. President, it is important that as a country we demonstrate that we are committed to doing what we need to do to address these issues. One other thing that I think we can identify as a symptom of perceived corruption or corruption is that it does not encourage mobility and meritocracy, Mr. President. It is important that people in the public service who have worked hard to improve themselves, to equip themselves with the correct qualifications, competencies, and skills, can aspire to achieve upward mobility and not feel that they could be overtaken or disregarded or undermined in any way. And of course, it undermines the opinion of public servants when there is perceived corruption for what we consider due process. And so, Mr. President, this bill, the Special Prosecutor Bill, seeks to address that issue. It's a piece of legislation that will do a number of things, and I will attempt to just go through some of the various components, the objective of this bill, and why we are coming today to present it to this Honorable Senate. Why this bill, Mr. President? This bill has an intention, and the intention of this bill is not to make people uncomfortable, although I have noticed some might be, but it's really to demonstrate intolerance by this government and this country, along with its citizens, for any perceived actions or decisions that may have been quote-unquote corrupt. So, Mr. President, if we go to the first page of this bill, number 2, it reads, "The purpose of this bill is to provide for the special prosecutor the investigation and prosecution of corrupt conduct of public officers and public officials, and for the appointment of the special prosecutor." Mr. President, that intention signals that this bill seeks to provide for somebody, of course a qualified, reputable, and competent legal mind, to be appointed for that particular purpose. Mr. President, if we go to page 7 of this bill, just to make a point here, and let's note that there is a page there that supersedes what was previously there. I hope that the Leader of Government Business has the information today. On section 4.1, it specifically refers to the bill not in any way being in conflict with the duties of what we consider the one of the senior persons in public prosecution, the Director of Public Prosecution, the DPP of this country. And in 4.1, I just for clarification, it reads appointment of the special prosecutor, and in that regard it reads, the Judicial and Legal Services Commission shall, after consultation with the Attorney General, appoint an attorney at law as the special prosecutor. And so the special prosecutor's appointment, from the point of appointment, is done in consultation with the Director of Public Prosecution.
I think you meant the Attorney General.
Sorry, the Attorney General. Sorry, the Attorney General. Thank you, Mr. President. So the AG is being consulted, and the bill, of course, does not take away or conflict the DPP. Now, Mr. President, there is a clear criteria outlined for the special prosecutor, and I wish to take you to page 8, on section 5 of the bill. That particular section, section 5 on page 8, explains who can and cannot qualify for to serve as a special prosecutor or the special prosecutor. And so a clear criteria is set out. And that criteria, Mr. President, includes someone, let me just read the introduction so it's clear. An attorney at law is disqualified from being the special prosecutor and is not eligible to be appointed the special prosecutor, or having been appointed, is not eligible to continue to be the special prosecutor if the attorney at law, now here are the conditions. Has filed for bankruptcy in court or in a court, or is declared by a court to be bankrupt. That's one of the conditions that eliminates you and makes you not eligible for being considered. B, is unable to discharge the functions of his or her office, whether arising from infirmity of body or mind or any other cause. C, is found to have committed professional misconduct under Section 35 of the Legal Professions Act, Cap 204. Another condition, D, is removed from the role under Section 29 of the Legal Prosecution Act, Cap 204. E, is convicted of a criminal offense, except if the offense, 1, is a minor traffic offense, or 2, is spent in accordance with the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, Cap 313, or is a member of Parliament. Mr. President, all of these conditions are set to ensure that the special prosecutor is an independent person who the public can trust, who the system has proven to be clean, so to speak, and clear of all possible questionable issues with their character. And so the bill sets out to explain who can and cannot qualify. So it's not just anybody who can, at the whims and fancies of politicians can just be appointed. Mr. President, the bill also explains the functions of the special prosecutor. On page 8, under section 6, it explains what the special prosecutor is supposed to do. And so it says the functions of the special prosecutor are A, to receive a complaint of corrupt conduct from any person and investigate the corrupt conduct. B, to investigate corrupt conduct on his or her own motion. C, to institute a criminal prosecution or civil claim in any court against a public officer or a public official if the conduct of the public officer or public official appears to the special prosecutor on reasonable grounds to involve corrupt conduct. And D, to prosecute a criminal offense or civil claim instituted by him or her in court. And in addition, there are two others that I need to mention. To prosecute a criminal offense for corrupt conduct referred to him or her by the Director of Public Prosecutions, that's the DPP. So again, it shows that there is linkage and cooperation with the DPP. And F, to pursue, coordinate, and supervise civil recovery. Mr. President, the bill is very specific, not only as deciding or explaining who should and should not be, but also explains the function of the public prosecutor. Now, the idea of corrupt conduct sometimes is referred to in very vague terms. Very, very vague. And it sometimes it can be misconstrued, because we must understand clearly when we say corrupt conduct, what exactly do we mean? And so I seek to indulge your attention here, get your attention here, Mr. President, and direct it to page 6 of the bill under section 1, because it is very important that we make it very clear to every party or everyone concerned what we mean or what is meant by corrupt conduct. Define it properly. And in this case, Mr. President, there is a proper explanation for corrupt conduct. And in this context, it means action by a public officer or public official that knowingly achieves for the public officer, public official, or for another person an undue advantage, and B, includes behavior specified in the schedule. So the idea of people deciding what for them is corrupt needs to be eliminated. It can't be a subjective view that you think this is corrupt today and this is not corrupt tomorrow, and people can, interpret it as they want. It's a legal process, so it has to be very clear as to what corrupt conduct is or is not. Mr. President, I can now draw your attention to Section 8. And Section 8 explains or deals with the powers of the special prosecutor. And the powers of the special prosecutor include a number of things. And I want to specifically refer to the first Section 8.1, because I earlier made mention of the absence of conflict between that special prosecutor and the DPP. And in Section 8.1, it says, subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecutions under Section 73 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, the special prosecutor may perform any function in relation to the institution, carrying on and withdrawal of a prosecution for an offense against the laws of St. Lucia, and may prosecute in a matter in his or her own name. So, Mr. President, this clearly indicates that the special prosecutor has specific powers. And the bill continues in sections 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to give further detail about the specific powers that the special prosecutor has. And I'm aware that all members in the Senate do have a copy and have had a lot of time to review. Now, Mr. President, the issue of, whether this bill is targeted at certain people or certain groups, I will leave that for another discussion. And all I'll say is, in that regard, if that is the perception, then let the chips fall where they may. There's a local Creole parlance that says, there are lots of other ways to say it, but si tobe jardin sekle, those types of things. So it's not something where we want to make any assumptions. We believe that it applies to not only politicians, it applies to public servants. And so those of us who know that we are above board should be very comfortable and very relaxed, not only today, but for the rest of our careers. Mr. President, I need to also highlight a need, in addition to this particular piece of legislation, that we as a government, as a parliament, as a country, need to give a little more support generally to the strengthening of our institutions in this country so that we can minimize the possibility of corrupt behavior being encouraged. So whereas this bill in itself seeks to deal with the special prosecutor to prosecute corruption, but as a country it's not enough to just have a bill, but you must also seek to strengthen other institutions. And this is important because the stronger your institutions, the less reason you will need to have to do this. And I would hope the less work the special prosecutor will have to do. And so I speak to institutions such as the Office of the Director of Audit, the Integrity Commission. I am aware, Mr. President, that in the last government's term, we as an opposition had to, constantly remind them that they need to constitute and put in place an Integrity Commission. I remembered filing a couple of times, and when I went to the office, there was nobody to give my documents to. And I was very concerned because I had to declare it's an obligation for me as a member of the Senate to have to declare my assets. And I did. I went through the various steps and did what I had to do. But when I had the documents, there was nowhere to collect it. And that for me was very sad. But this is not the case now, Mr. President. I'm very happy to say that right now the Integrity Commission office is functioning. And that I encourage all members of this Honorable House, Honorable Senate, to ensure that they make use of it and put the House in order by the deadlines that are always stipulated. So, Mr. President, I ask that, and I encourage that these other institutions are made to function properly, thereby minimizing the need for us to be putting this in place. But at the moment, it is deemed to be necessary. Mr. President, I also want to say that as leaders, we must not only come to this House and put legislation in place and attempt to make sure that persons who are guilty are prosecuted. We have a duty and a responsibility as leaders of this nation, Mr. President, to lead from the front. We have to set the example. I've said it many times before under different circumstances. We have to talk the talk and walk the walk. Mr. President, it has to start with us. And I am very happy to inform this House that in the person of the Honorable Prime Minister, I have a very exemplary leader when it comes to that type of behavior. He has set the tone. And when I sit in his cabinet, I can tell you, I feel that he keeps his eyes very wide open, and he has made it very clear at every forum. He has made it very clear that he will not tolerate corruption among any of his cabinet members. He will not tolerate, and he has advised his cabinet members, he has advised all members of his party and his government to ensure that they too do not tolerate any form of corruption in the various offices, portfolios, and positions that they hold. So he leads by example, and he encourages his men and women and members of his team to do likewise. And so I believe I am standing here, Mr. President, as an example of someone who is led by a leader who is very clear in his mind and very clear among us that corruption will not be tolerated. And I want to applaud that, and I believe St. Lucians need also to know that the people who are telling them that they should not be corrupt, the people who are telling the public officers to be accountable, that they too start by themselves demonstrating that they will not stand for it. Mr. President, we must also develop a culture of intolerance as a country. You know, sometimes people have certain expectations of you because they believe that there are certain things that they can ask of you. And thankfully, some of us, certain people will not come to us to make certain requests. But if persons perceive you to be somebody who is likely to get involved in a corrupt act, they might approach you. And so, Mr. President, we must develop a culture where our citizens will not even think of approaching a public servant or a politician and even make a request for you to do anything that is not above board. We have to get to that stage in this country. It's not only for us to put legislation in place. We have to ourselves be comfortable that people will not even approach us and expect us to behave in a corrupt way. So, Mr. President, these are some of the additional thoughts that I think we need to add, and to ensure that the legislation is in place. It has to be. The special prosecutor is in place. We have to demonstrate to the country that this government is not only talking about corruption. We have to demonstrate to this country that this government is ready to deal with it if there is any act of corruption. And that they can trust us that we will get rid of that kind of behavior in any group, whether it is on one side or another side or in any sector of the public service. But for us to do that, Mr. President, we have to ensure that we take the necessary steps. There must be legislation, so we come to this House to approve legislation. There must be process, so we must appoint a prosecutor, a special prosecutor who is impartial, and there is a process to do so. And there's also a need for us to ensure that the institutions that already exist can provide support and can work along with the special prosecutor when it's necessary. We also want, as I said, to ensure that we encourage other institutions that are already dealing with that type of work to be strengthened so that they can be more effective. Because if we can minimize corruption at the very lower level, it will not permeate the other areas and get to the top. And finally, Mr. President, if we speak of eliminating corruption, we as leaders must demonstrate it in our own practices. We must give the people in this country the confidence that we are the first group who will, in our actions, demonstrate that we are intolerant and we are not involved ourselves. So, Mr. President, I hope that, there's one more thing I forgot and I need to mention. There's another very important entity in this country that needs to be part of this effort, and that is our religious organizations, our churches. They are supposed to be the institutions that encourage high moral and ethical standards. And I think we must ensure that in our deliberations, in our actions, that they get to play a role. I believe that they too, if they are on board and they understand the need for that they will help, as we do, it takes a village to raise a child. They will be part of that village that can ensure that the persons who enter the public service at the point of entry are already not persons who are inclined to engage in corrupt actions. And so I believe all of these players are very important and should play a role. So, Mr. President, I present this bill for consideration to this Honorable Senate. I anticipate a discussion that will be interesting, and I hope that members in their deliberations pay attention to the intention of the bill and that it will in fact achieve the objectives that it set out to in this case. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question is that the Special Prosecutor's Bill be read a second time. Senator Fede.
I'm good. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, widespread commentary from the St. Lucia Labour Party parliamentarians have confirmed that this bill, in as much as it is an attempt to improve the investigative purposes into public officers and public officials, that this is very much an election promise as well. Mr. President, the allegations before the elections were many. They were widespread. They claimed that St. Lucia had become a cesspool for corruption. Interestingly, though, Mr. President, 1 year later, that we're hearing comments from some of these same parliamentarians that have said that they are getting a lot of pressure from their supporters to find a way to bring previous or UWP ministers to justice. Mr. President, I want to encourage the members on the government side to investigate me. Please, hurry up. Why are you taking so long? Please let the investigations begin. I mean, why is it you need to pass a bill? Come to my home, bring the police, come to everything that I own, and do an investigation right now. What are you wasting time for? So it's been 12 months, and you haven't been able to investigate any of us. You've got several mechanisms by which you can do so. And so I'll get to that later in my presentation. But what I want to state clearly is that every single senator on this side, we are in support of anything that seeks to stamp out corruption from our system. We are in support of that. That's right. I'm not going to stand here and defend or criticize the spirit of the bill. Please, I mean, whatever you can do to ensure that we beef up the capacity of our country to not only investigate, but to bring to justice those who are found guilty. That is welcomed by all of us on this side. But what we will not tolerate are political accusations that are going to cast unfair aspersions on people's reputations, on people's character, and on
Mr. President, I stand on a point of order. The member is misleading the House at this point. I have just heard him mention...
Miss Leader of Government Business, I had not recognized you.
Pardon my...
On what?
The member is misleading this House. He has just made reference to accusations of members, and I'm the only person who has spoken this morning on this bill, and in my entire presentation, I have never made a single accusation on anyone. So I believe if he's going to accuse anyone of doing that, at least I'm the only speaker. I do not think that has happened, and he needs to withdraw or go away from that particular point.
Very well. Your point is well taken. I had recognized that, but I was allowing the member a little leeway. But the fact that you raised it, I think that your point of order is in order. So, Senator Fede, I hope that you obviously concur that the senator had not made or cast any aspersions on your character, and what has happened in a different place has no bearing at this sitting. So you may continue.
Mr. President, I thank you for your guidance as always. But if I can just quote the senator, where he said that some people might be nervous about the passage of this bill, and it came from his own mouth. I just want the senator to know that Dominic Fede is not nervous. So, and I have to make it clear.
Senator, yes? Are you imputing that you yourself may have something to worry about? You said that Dominic Fede is not, he never mentioned Dominic Fede. He never said any member on the other side. So let's just move away from this. I think you have your contribution to make. I think we should just move away from that. You may continue.
Very well, Mr. President. So to continue and to implement this campaign promise, we've seen a nod of approval on the government side when I mentioned that this is a campaign promise. So I take it that there is concurrence, widespread concurrence on the government side, that the bill is very much a political campaign promise, rather than an effort to me, in my opinion, to improve the judicial system of our country. And so I understand, when governments are failing, they have to find distractions, and they have to change the narrative and try to blow smoke screens. And that happens, Mr. President.
Flashing mirrors.
But, I want to bring our attention to now the bill. Mr. Speaker, on the first page of the bill, the explanatory note, and I hope I have the right bill this time, because this government has a way of bringing legislation last minute to this chamber. We see today that there are several changes that we have been presented overnight. We just arrived, and they are here. So on section 2 of the bill, of the explanatory note, section 2, says that the purpose of the bill is to provide for the special prosecutor the investigation and prosecution of corrupt conduct of public officers as the first point. So we're talking here about civil servants.
Senator, could you direct us specifically to where you're referring to?
Explanatory note, page 1, just the very first page.
Okay.
Explanatory note.
Yes, right.
So we have here the public officers. Now, I wonder, Mr. President, why would the government feel the need, and it's for them to answer this question, to bring legislation to the House or to strengthen legislation to investigate public officers? Does this mean that the government have a compelling amount of evidence that the civil service is indeed corrupt, and so therefore it needs to come to ensure that it strengthens the laws to better investigate the public service or public officers or civil servants of this country? I think that question must be answered in this honorable House, and I think that an explanation is required, because I found that to be very strange, notwithstanding the fact that there are other pieces of legislation that we could have achieved the very same thing, where and I will go into various pieces of legislation a little later, but just dealing with the contents of this bill for now, I think we need to know where the government stands. Does it have large suspicions? Has it deemed the civil service to be corrupt in this country? That's a very interesting point there. The section 4 of the bill. I think section 4.1, subsection 1, says the Judicial and Legal Service Commission shall, after consultation with the Attorney General, appoint an attorney at law as the special prosecutor. Now, Mr. President, I think it should be the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, full stop. Because what you want to accomplish, Mr. President, is an independence of our justice system. So when you're going to go and you're going to say that, the Judicial and Legal Services Commission must then consult the Attorney General, what you're basically saying is that they must consult the Cabinet. The Attorney General is a member of the Cabinet. This is where all the political functionaries sit. The Attorney General is a political appointment most times in various governments. When the government changes, they come with their own Attorney General. So for me, this undermines the independence of the Judicial and Legal Services Committee. I would much prefer to see the prosecution, state prosecution, enforcing that separation of duties between the Parliament that is responsible for making sure that we make the laws, let the judicial and legal services, the judiciary, interpret those laws. And then, of course, allow the laws to be the ambit or the parameters by which public officers and public officials can actually execute their public functions. Now, I have a big problem with this, and I think that this is sad that this is crafted in this way, because really it should be the public prosecutor by himself. Now, Section 6(1) subsection B, subsection A. It says the functions of the public prosecutor under that section to receive a complaint of corrupt conduct from any person and investigate that corrupt conduct. Now, it raises the question, Mr. President, it means that anybody can go and make a complaint of suspicion of corruption by a public officer, by a civil servant, or by a public official, a minister of government, for example. Now, you know, when you're going to make these, when it is structured in this way, it begs the question, which complaints will the public prosecutor, being a functionary that's clearly going to be depending on the government for some level of survival, because if you went on to Section 4, in Section 8, 4 as well, subsection 4, 8.4, it says that the special prosecutor may, with the approval of the Attorney General, engage under agreements in writing, persons having suitable qualifications. So we see that there is a dependence on the Attorney General being alluded to in several of these sections, dependence on the cabinet. So will the functions of the special prosecutor, will it be in large measure influenced by the political directorate, or will the members of the public have equal access to claims or concerns that they may have about the manner in which public officers and public officials dispense their functions? That is a very important argument that must be answered. Now, Mr. President, interestingly, I heard one MP in the government side said that this will only work if the government will start by setting a good example. It says that this will be of no use, in the words of Emma Hippolyte, the MP for Soufrière, this will be of no use if the government doesn't set the example. And then we're doing this at a time, interestingly, when they are looming questions about the character of government officials. These questions have been asked for time in perpetuity. I mean, we just had a case where a government minister had to go to the United States to address the United Nations, and then he got what, a 5-day, a 7-day visa? I mean, these raises questions about what kind of cabinet do we have in St. Lucia these days. And I know that the government, it's hard for them to swallow that pill, but I think that these are very valid questions that a government minister with an established diplomatic relations require a one-entry visa, and then the government side is going to respond by trying to say, well, there are other UWP functionaries who are corrupt as well. But you have to look at the man in the mirror. This bill can only work if you look at yourselves in the mirror. Take a deep, hard look at yourselves in the mirror. And when you are comfortable that you would have made and set the example to the people of St. Lucia, then you can come and talk about prosecuting corruption. Yes?
The member has risen on a point of order.
Mr. President.
What point of order do you raise?
The member is imputing improper motive against a member of Parliament. If the member knows or has evidence that a particular member of parliament has or was given a 7-day or any type of visa, and he wants to bring that up in this Senate, he needs to provide that evidence. If he does not have that evidence, he should desist from going there.
Senator Fader, please. You have heard the senator, the leader of government business. You did assert that a particular member of the lower house was issued with a visa of some duration. Do you have any evidence of that? Do you have any evidence of that? And if you don't, I would suggest that you move away from that line of argument.
Mr. President.
And to withdraw the statement, because it requires, please direct your questions from me. Your assertion requires evidence. The member and leader of government business has risen on a point of order, indicating that you do not have any evidence of that which you have asserted. If you don't have the evidence and you cannot provide it to this House, at this point, I would request that you withdraw your statement.
Mr. President, I will be guided by you, and I'll do two things. I'll withdraw the statement, number one, because I have respect for your authority, but I also want to point to the standing orders, which are quite clear. It is not the opposition. The opposition does not have to provide evidence.
You said, excuse me, sir?
Yeah?
You said,
but
I have asked you to withdraw the statement. So you have agreed to do so. You may now do so. If you need to clarify any issue, I will allow you the leeway to do so, but you need to withdraw the statement.
Thank you very well, Mr. President. Very well, very well. I withdraw the statement if that meets you, but I'll posit this question. Does every single member of the current administration have a visa to go to the United States? That is an important, a diplomatic and personal visa. That is the question I put to this administration right now. And if you can prove that every single member of your government has a visa, then I will say to you, you are presiding over a government where the people of St. Lucia does not have to raise any suspicion about its character. But I have a right, it is my constitutional right, to ask the question, right? Does every single member in your government, do they have a diplomatic and personal visa? Now, my suspicion is that they don't, right? And so therefore, whether it's a requirement to be a minister or not, but what it does, it raises serious questions. And I'll use myself, Mr. President, if as a senator of this country, I go to the U.S. Embassy and I apply for a visa. And I wanna, you guys are getting so touchy that I'll put myself in the situation. I understand. Now, if I go and I apply for a visa, and the United States, with which St. Lucia has very established and long-standing diplomatic relations,
Mr. President, I
decides that it's going to reject my visa.
Leader of government business.
Mr. President, I rise on the point of order 37.6. The member is referring to us in this honorable Senate as you guys. 37.6 is very clear about how we should be referred to. And I will not sit here after having stood already and allow myself to be referred to as you guys in this honorable Senate. And again, Mr. President, I ask that the member please withdraw that type of statement and desist from referring to anyone in this chamber as you guys. And I think he's been disrespectful in that regard. If I may just add, Mr. President, while I'm on my feet, I believe that all of us in this chamber, including his colleagues, need to be apologized to for what he just said.
Honorable Senator, you have heard the objection from the leader of government business. I need not elaborate, and so therefore I will simply tell you to please be guided. You may continue.
So, Mr. President, I'm big enough to apologize. I didn't realize that the members on the other side are so touchy, but it's no problem. Honorable members on the other side, so if the honorable members, the right honorable members on the government side would be so kind to reveal to the public whether every government, whether they have the evidence, because I'm in opposition, I would not be in government to have documents to know, but it is widespread that not every member, it is widespread opinion, and I think I want to raise this question as we're talking about corruption, as to whether every member has a visa in your cabinet, and if there are members within your cabinet that does not have the visa to go to the United States, it then begs the question, why? And then when you come up with the why, if it is that the answer is no, then as well I think you need to ask yourself whether
Honorable
you are.
Senator Fede,
Yes?
you are being extremely speculative. Yes, you are being extremely speculative. The subject matter and the bill under discussion is the special prosecutor bill. You need not speculate to try to create or cast any aspersions. You may, in accordance to section 37(1) of the standing orders, to confine your submissions and your speech to the subject matter at hand. That is a special prosecutor bill. You do not need to import any arguments to try to create an environment to cast aspersions of corruption. So I think it would serve you well and serve this honorable House well if you would debate the substantive bill under discussion. You may proceed.
Very well, Mr. President. It brings me then, Mr. President, to section 8.5 of the bill that we are discussing here today. So it says in section 8, subsection 5, that the special prosecutor is deemed to have the powers of the Director of Public Prosecution under an enactment, except for the powers exclusively given to the Director of Public Prosecution under the Constitution. So this, to me, Mr. President, collides with the role of the Director of Public Prosecution, of which the Constitution of St. Lucia makes provisions for. So it says, except for those positions, but where the Constitution does not make mention of the role of the Director of Public Prosecution, it says therefore that the public prosecution can do the exact same thing as the Director of Public Prosecution. That is confusion. When you have two bosses, two milk crabs in the same hole trying to do exactly the same thing, then you will have your wires crossed in all kinds of ways. So, I mean, for me, that is typical of the status quo, where we see that this administration. Now, Mr. President, you see, there is so much happening around this bill. And I'm disappointed that, all of what is being said in the media, in public commentary, even in the lower house debate, because we're now continuing what has happened in the lower house. This bill was laid in the lower house, and there is a debate that took place, and I'm finding it extremely strange and irregular that we're asked to continue the process of the passage of this legislation, but yet we are asked to then ignore the intent of the same legislation we are here to debate. So therefore, comments in the lower house give us the understanding, in addition to what the leader of government business has said, it gives us a clearer understanding of where the government is going with the bill. All of us here, to get a truer picture, we want to understand where the cabinet of ministers are going with this. There might only be one or two that are here. And so we saw that from cabinet after cabinet ministers yesterday, where the bill would have derived from, that we would have had a clearer understanding of what is the intent of this administration. And the layer of the bill, the Prime Minister, did deliver quite an extensive explanation on what the bill is seeking to do. So I find it rather disappointing that we're being asked to confine our comments only to the leader of government business, whose comments by itself will not do justice to us understanding where the government is going with the bill. Is it that the upper house is detaching itself from
Senator Fede,
the spirit
Senator
of...
Fede,
Yes?
I must correct you.
Yeah.
I do not believe that anybody has asked you or any other member in this House to confine their comments or statements to the leader of government business. What you were asked was to address your comments to the substantive bill before you, and that is the Special Prosecutors Act. I think that the leader of government business offered an explanation, and he attempted to describe the intention of the bill. It is open for you to take objections with whatever you wish to, but it must be within the spirit of what the bill is intended to do. You may add and you may make submissions based on perhaps improving the bill, or you may even criticize the bill. That is within your right. But it is not open to you to import arguments that is not relative to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the clarification. And so, Mr. President, the purpose of this bill, as cited in the explanatory note, page 1, section 2 says clearly, the bill is to provide for the special prosecutor the investigation and prosecution of corrupt conduct of public officials and public officers and public officials, and for the appointment of the public prosecutor. Now, the purpose of this legislation is quite clear. We are looking here to beef up the system, right, to be in a better position so that we could investigate corruption and prosecute public officers and public officials. This is happening at a time where there are a lot of questions being raised, and where there are documents to prove, right, that you have to ask yourself, is it allowed in our system? And is it a breach of public conduct when the security contract, for example, of a government agency belongs to a company where a minister's attaché has interests? That's the question. I'm not casting aspersions on anybody, right? The question is, where there is the attaché of a sitting government minister has a contract of a government agency, whether that is in fact a breach of conduct. And I think that we will have to ask ourselves that important question and issues like that, is it okay that if, for example, you have a meeting of a statutory body, the national lotteries, for example, and on the minutes of that meeting, you see that there is an account that is mentioned by the board members, and it has already been made a document of this House. And if you look at the Hansard, right, you will see that the minister's account was being referenced as it relates to the accounts of the national lottery, right? How is that? The question we must answer, whether issues like these are in the spirit of what this legislation is trying to fight. And these are some of the questions that this administration seems to be running away from. And so whether, you want to stand on a point of order and ensure that I bow to you and give you the platitudes that you feel that you deserve, doesn't change the price of coffee. The government side still hasn't answered a lot of pertinent questions that the public of St. Lucia deserves to know. In the government records, the government has already done an investigation into the...
I remember you have 15 minutes to complete your presentation.
Into corruption of the perceived or alleged corruption by the Stephenson King administration between 2006 and 2011. And that report was submitted to the former Attorney General. It's the Robert Linquist report, of which an FBI prosecutor or investigator was contracted by the government, and check the Treasury and you will see, and you could back it up. I don't have the documents now, but I'm saying that it is in the Treasury, and there is evidence that $3 million was paid for this investigation. It is time for the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, now that you're back in office, make that report public. Because what it is, it's raising questions as to whether what you found in that report and in that investigation, whether that in fact has cast serious and telling truths, and whether the evidence is so overwhelming on some of your sitting government ministers. That is very critical for the people of St. Lucia to know. Otherwise, and the reason why I'm mentioning these instances, Mr. President, is because we're coming to do the same thing that our system already allows us to do. So, I mean, there is already the Crown's Proceeding Act. There is the Integrity in Public Life Act. There's a Criminal Code. There's the St. Lucia Constitution. All of these, Mr. President, exist. And if the government is serious about corruption, they could have been prosecuting people already. But you see, this is more about an election promise in my mind. And they can deny it, but in my estimation, in my opinion, this is more of an election promise, and this is more about politics rather than improving our justice system. And this is what I find extremely concerning. You have investigations that you've done before. You have not produced a report. You've spent millions of taxpayers' monies, right, to investigate the Stephenson King administration of 2006 to 2011, and you haven't made it public. No, I wasn't in the 2006 to 2011 government. Please, no, 2006 to 2011. I'm speaking to you, Mr. President. So, if you have evidence that there was corruption on the airport project as conceived by the former Prime Minister Stephenson King's administration, then what you ought to do is make that report public. Because I want to have confidence in what you're doing. I want to have confidence that when we pass this bill and we have a public prosecutor, that there will be transparency. And so I'm raising the question, and I noticed that the bill does make reference to an annual report. That's in section 23. The special prosecutor shall within 3 months after each financial year prepare and deliver to the Attorney General a report of the work of the special prosecutor and the staff of the special prosecutor during the financial year. Now, that is fine. But the past, and I'm hoping that this bill will correct the wrong of that past, whereby we have outstanding the Robert Linquist report. Please release it to the people of St. Lucia. Set aside for this in the budget is $1 million, right? And if we reference the Prime Minister budget speech and the estimates, we'll see set aside for the public prosecutor is $1 million. That's a lot of money. And so what we want to ensure is that when we spend the taxpayers' money, that there will be transparency. And that is the point that we're making as it relates to the special prosecutor. I mean, I am hoping that finally that a lot of the allegations we've heard during the election campaign about the St. Jude's Hospital, the airport project, I've seen that a committee have come back to say that the government handling of the airport project is fine and the project should continue, which is including the tendering and all aspects to it. They're going to the next phase. They're not stopping the airport. There is nothing wrong there. We saw that the statements made by the government on the shock housing project, where the famous 80-20 line was a half-truth rather than the real truth. And if we're going to take aspects of a contract that we deem to be bad and not provide the whole truth to the people of St. Lucia, then I think we're doing a disservice. So I'm happy, Mr. President, that at least we have beefed up the capacity and we have a structured piece of legislation now, or an attempt at it, to help to now call the bluff of politicians who scream corruption to win elections rather than to improve justice and rather than to bring anyone to justice. In my lifetime, right, I have not seen the Labour Party prosecute any public official. But what I've seen in my lifetime, and if I follow the history of the Labour Party, I will see that there has been widespread allegations of corruption on public officials. But if you match that up to what they have done with the within the ambit of the existing laws that we have to carry out the very same function, we see that the two really doesn't match up. So it's just a lot of screams, a lot of smoking mirrors, but not necessarily coming forward, Mr. President, with any real solution to the problem. And so forgive me, Mr. President, if I'm a bit worried that what could be a really good day, a special moment in the history of our country, as the member said, I disagree with it. I don't think that his statement I see his statement merely saying this is a special day in the history of the politics of the St. Lucia Labour Party, right. not in the justice system of St. Lucia, because this is clear, the intent, everything. I mean, we have seen that the government has tried hard to look as if they're going to be objective in this, but it is clear to me what this seeks to do. This is seeking to gain more control of the justice system. The question must be asked, why? Why don't you just beef up the DPP's office? Why don't you just give the DPP more staff, for example? That question must be asked. Why do you need to have someone at the same level of the DPP almost? A constitutionally reserved position? Why do you have to do this? Why not give the DPP more investigators, for example? Why hasn't the government considered that in this bill? But instead, you need to have someone that you can control, it would appear, right? So that you can have more of a sway on how these things go. So this is very dangerous, Mr. President, in a way, but I'm not at all satisfied that this by itself is going to work if we don't have the right attitude from the government, and if we don't have a government that's willing to look at itself in the mirror and to say that we are going to, for example, do a better vetting process as to the type of people we include in our cabinet. This is going to cast aspersions on what should be a well-intended bill. A bill that is brought to the House to say, well, all right, we're going to ensure we get the bad guys in government and government ministers who are taking advantage of the system or are deemed to be corrupt. I welcome that. I support such moves. Of course, yes, and all of us do. But what we don't support, right, are attempts to politicize the system. This is an undermining of our democracy. I would have much rather see the public prosecutor being part of the DPP's office, reports to the DPP, right? And so we can beef up the DPP's office. This is dangerous. This is gonna cause collision. And I don't want my statements in any way to be seen as if we're nervous. Nobody is nervous about anything that you want to bring forward. I'm saying to you, investigate me. Why are you waiting so long? Move faster. Investigate us so that the public can see that everything that you have said is all political gimmickry with no facts to back it up. Mr. President, I want to thank you very much for your indulgence. You've been very patient with me today. Thank you very much.
I don't see any lights, but certainly.
Sorry, I turned it off because of the feedback. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, just a few comments on the bill. I'll try to stay as far away from the politics as possible. Before I start, I just want to join you in expressing condolences to the family of Mr. Donald Alsey, who served as the Speaker of the House during a very turbulent time in our history. I also want to join the leader of government business in wishing the clerk of the Senate, a wonderful retirement, and thank her for her service, her human service to both chambers. I also want to congratulate the members of staff who hopefully will get their just due when various replacements are made, and look forward to continuing to work with them and congratulate them on their hard work. Permit me, Mr. President, to start by commending the government on the approach that they've been taking to legislation of late. In my first sitting in the House, I did make the point that I did not want a situation where we are continually coming to the House and going through all the sittings, all the readings, of the bill in one sitting. And I appreciate, yes, we're doing it here today, but the fact is this bill has been with us for a while, and the Firearms Act as well previously had been with us for a while, which allowed persons to make comments. I recognize that these bills have gone through several iterations, which means that the process is actually playing out as it's supposed to. That persons are being given an opportunity to comment on the bills, and I keep getting feedback, and that the amendments are being made and improving the bills before they come into the House. Mr. President, returning to this particular bill, the Special Prosecutions Act, which, as the leader of government business and my colleague senators on the other side have indicated, is aimed at combating the scourge of corruption, and therefore is quite a significant piece of legislation. When one speaks of corruption, oftentimes it's spoken of in terms of medical or disease. It's often called a cancer. And I believe that is a very apt description for corruption. It infests our body politic. It causes it to rot from the interior. It often metastasizes into other aspects of life and contributes to criminal activity in a number of ways. When we look at the effect that corruption has on our society and our society generally, We recognize quite often that it robs us of our resources. Instead of resources going where they ought to and benefiting the country as a whole or the society as a whole, oftentimes they go into the pockets of persons. And it's appropriate that this bill deals with public officers as a whole and not just politicians, because there is corruption at all levels. I know we tend to focus on the politicians, and I know there is some fear as well that perhaps public officers may tend or get caught in the mill. But the fact is that corruption operates at all levels of our society, and we need to take steps to address it at all levels. Corruption increases inefficiency, because oftentimes, especially in tendering processes, persons who are awarded tenders through corrupt means are not the most efficient, they're not the most creative, they're not the most, they don't have the necessary technology oftentimes. And I'm sure we all have heard of anecdotes of situations where contracts have been awarded to entities who then have to subcontract to other persons who have the necessary equipment and capacity to carry out the contracts. Perhaps most significantly, it degrades governance, and it impacts on our trust and our faith in our institutions. When persons in society regard Parliament, regard ministries, regard departments of government as corrupt, they are more likely to begin to do things on their own and not have any faith or any trust in the organs of government. That causes society to break down. When we look at a lot of the problems that we are facing now, the antisocial behavior, the violence, the crime, a lot of it stems from the fact that persons looking at our governmental structures feel that they don't serve them. They don't serve their purposes. And in fact, they are so rotten that if these guys who should set an example for us are conducting themselves in that way, why should I not then seek to enrich myself by any means that I can find? And so corruption causes its pernicious effect to infect all aspects of our life and our society. And so therefore it's something that we have to combat diligently and take all steps and all efforts that we can to fight it. In fact, I think it's instructive that the Constitution actually has two bodies, well, three if you include the Director of Public Prosecutions, who have a role in fighting corruption. The Constitution specifically provides for, and I'll return to that a little bit later, the Parliamentary Commissioner and for the Integrity Commission. So our foundational document, the document that underpins all of our society, recognizes that corruption is a scourge that must be combated. As I said, I'll stay away from the politics of what is and who has been and hasn't been corrupt. But the fact is, when we look at Transparency International and its International Corruption Perception Index, St. Lucia has slid. In 2012, we had a score of 70. Now, the way the scores work, the closer you are to 100, the less corrupt you are perceived. We are now at 56. So from 2012 to 2021, we've moved from 70. And if you take into account the fact that the top score, or the top score of Norway is 88, that shows you how close we were, or how high we were held in regard not too long ago. But for whatever reason, and I'm not going to go into how we've ended up where we are, the fact is St. Lucia is now regarded as a much more corrupt society than it used to be. And so we have to take steps to combat it. We have to do what we can within our power to limit, to reverse, and to change the trend on which we've been. I note, and I noted before, that the Constitution makes provisions for certain entities which have corruption fighting powers. In fact, at sections 112 and 113 of the Constitution, the Parliamentary Commissioner has certain powers with regard to investigating corruption. She can't investigate specific charges, but she can investigate generally. I say she because the current holder happens to be a lady, but he or she can investigate generally the operation of government. And where they find that there's evidence of corruption, they have a responsibility. Section 113 says they shall report that to the Director of Public Prosecutions for onward action. Similarly, the Integrity Commission, which is provided for under the Constitution, and we have the Integrity in Public Life Act, which seeks to operationalize the operations of the Integrity Commission, also has a role in combating corruption. As the leader of government business pointed out, all of us in this chamber are required to make declarations with regard to our income and our assets. I don't know how many persons have done it, and I know when you look at the lists that are published in the Gazette, oftentimes it is honored more in the breach than the observance. But the fact is, Section 25 makes it a crime not to file that declaration. Yet, how many persons have been prosecuted for that breach? And part of the problem for that is the fact that both the Parliamentary Commissioner and the Integrity Commission are severely under-resourced. I heard the leader of government business note that under this current government, the Integrity Commission is operating. But I would like to inform him maybe that he should go across and have a word with the staff of the Integrity Commission, and he realized just how severely understaffed they are. A secretary, 2 administrative officers, and a cleaner are not sufficient persons to conduct the serious affairs and investigations that the Integrity Commission is charged with. And similarly, the Parliamentary Commissioner is severely understaffed. So whereas our Constitution and our laws have made provisions for things to fight corruption, yet still we have not put the resources behind it that are necessary to ensure that that essential task is undertaken and successfully pursued. And so I agree that to move things forward and to ensure that we do properly take steps against corruption, there's need for that singular mind and singular focus that can come from having a special prosecutor whose sole task, and I know the DPP has general powers of investigation, prosecution of criminal activity. But the fact is, the DPP is tasked with investigating and prosecuting all crime in St. Lucia. And whereas we might like him to focus on specific things, we cannot dictate his priorities. And if you are telling me that he has a backlog of 100 murder cases, for example, I don't expect him, and I can't realistically ask him, to take his focus away from making sure that these persons, whether they are guilty or not, are dealt with, to then approach and deal with issues of corruption. So I support the concept of creating a special prosecutor who is tasked specifically with dealing with the issues of corruption. But I want to reiterate that he can only, or she can only, successfully undertake this task if given sufficient resources to do so. Another issue that will affect the success or lack thereof of the special prosecutor, and the legislation is silent on it, so I'm hoping that gives him the scope to do whatever he needs to do, will be the practical interaction between him or her and the other arms of government that have a corruption fighting responsibility or task or duty. So how does this body or this office relate to the Parliamentary Commissioner? How does this office relate to the Integrity Commission? How does this office relate to the FIA? There's going to need to be integration and a sharing of information. Now, the Act does not specifically state that, and perhaps that is something that can be looked to going forward. Making specific provision, because oftentimes all 3 pieces of those legislation, if you look at them, require that the information be kept confidential. Except for the Parliamentary Commission, as I noted, which does make provision for or requires you to speak to the DPP. So there may need to be some alteration of the legislation going forward to enable those entities to share the information amongst themselves, to ensure that you have proper exchange so that information is not held in a silo and does not get to where it needs to be to ensure that proper actions are taken. Transparency is an essential aspect of good governance, and it's something I think we need to address as part of this fight against corruption. I listened intently to the debate in the lower house, and a lot of revelations were made. But one thing that came across to me is that, and I don't want to say that they are self-serving revelations, but the fact is the revelations were only made because it suited the purposes of the persons making them. There is dire need for a Freedom of Information Act in St. Lucia, which will allow our journalists, will allow the civil society, which will allow somebody with way too much time on their hands to go into government and investigate for themselves the operations of government, to be able to review the documents and the decisions made by the various ministers and ministries, so that where they have the view that improper actions are taking place, they can bring that information to light. And on that information being brought to light, further action can be taken if necessary. We often focus on, and I'm sure we all are familiar with the Panama Papers and the various massive leaks that have taken place where persons have acted as whistleblowers. But we don't recognize the yeoman work that has been done based on freedom of information requests, both in the United States and in the UK and closer in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, where such legislation exists. So I would like to commend to the government side that they consider, as part of this whole combating of corruption, the passage of a Freedom of Information Act, which would allow persons, as I indicated, to go into government, ask questions which are pertinent, and receive the information that is necessary for them to understand what is going on in government, and so that things are not hidden or brought out only when it serves the political interests of the persons who are revealing them. I think as well, Mr. President, that in addition to passing this piece of legislation, there will be the need, and I notice there isn't a specific function given to the special prosecution in relation to this, and I understand perhaps they may not have the resources to do it, but there will be need for education, both amongst the public service, public officers, and society as a whole, as to what exactly corruption is. We tend to think of corruption in the bright lights, the bribery, the undue influence, those sorts of things. But we often forget about conflicts of interest. And from my observation and from my experience, that is oftentimes where the majority of corruption occurs. And a lot of the petty corruption occurs. Somebody's put into a position where they have a professional life and they figure, well, I'm qualified to do this. Why should I not benefit from my position here? So a contract is going, they form a company, they tender for the thing, even if they step aside. But in some cases, I think it should be incumbent upon you that, notwithstanding the fact that you have the capacity, notwithstanding the fact that you may be even the best qualified person for the task, to avoid even the perception of corruption, you should withdraw yourself from consideration. That is the standard to which we should aspire, where persons recognize that, you know what, I may suffer somewhat personally, financially, but the fact is I am going into this to benefit the country, not myself. And so you sacrifice some of that. You will not do it for a long period of time. You will do your service and move on. But the fact is you should hold yourself to that highest possible standard, where there's not even a modicum of consideration that you have benefited from your position as head of a board, as a member of a board, or as a minister, or even as a member of the public service. I think too often we make the assumption that, you know, once I am giving something back, it's okay. But conflict of interest is beyond that. Conflict of interest requires that you hold yourself to the highest possible standard and ensure that your interests in no way conflict with your public duties. So even if, yes, you may be giving some value for money, there ought never to be a situation where you are benefiting as a result of your position. And so education has to go hand in hand with the passage of this bill. Because, as I said, whereas persons would be expected to know the law, the practice of it may be something a little different. Permit me then, Mr. President, to turn to the bill itself. Most of the issues I had with the initial bill, I noticed in its further iterations, have been addressed. But there's still one or two things that I think we may wish to consider going forward. So, as has been noted, the independence of the special prosecutor will be essential to him or her being able to fulfill the roles spelt out in the Act. And whereas under Section 4, it's... is it Section 4? I can't find a particular section now, but it says that in exercising his powers, he's not subject, or I keep saying he, my apologies to the ladies present, he or she is not subject to being, that's section 8(6), not subject to direction of any person. And I noticed that is essential to ensuring the independence of the special prosecutor. As I noted previously, that independence can be undercut if he doesn't have independence of finance or control of his own finances. And as well, there needs to be provision that says that once his or her conditions of employment are set, that those conditions cannot be changed to negatively impact upon him or her while he is in office. Security of tenure and security perhaps of salary is again an important means of ensuring that the special prosecutor remains independent and is able to carry out the function without interference from anyone. I notice as well under Section 16 that it provides for the employment of attorneys based on the advice of by the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, based on the advice or communication with the Attorney General. I would like to suggest that perhaps going forward, again, to secure the independence of the special prosecutor, that these appointments should be made with consultation with the special prosecutor rather than the Attorney General. The Attorney General's role has already been enshrined in the appointment of the special prosecutor. Having selected and appointed a special prosecutor, get out of his way. Or her way. Apologies again. Let that person do their job to the best of their ability. We have the capacity in the Act if they don't operate properly to withdraw the appointment. But let them and the Judicial and Legal Services Commission be responsible for the hiring of the attorneys. I do not believe that the Attorney General should be involved in that stage of things. Just taking a step back to Section 5, and again, in light of the back and forth that has gone on today, I note that the last disqualification is that the person is a member of Parliament. I would like to suggest to the Leader of Government Business that again, they may suggest disqualifying anybody who has served as a member of Parliament. I think we have sufficient lawyers in St. Lucia and externally, because this does not say that it has to be a St. Lucian who serves as the special prosecutor. I believe we have enough persons available to us of proper qualification and ability that we can avoid, again, even the perception of political interference by involving former politicians. So I would suggest that this is something you may wish to look at going forward. I wish to refer again to Section 26 of the bill, which speaks to protections of persons making the complaint. I'm happy that this section has been included and provide a little bit more protection for whistleblowers or persons making complaints. But again, I think this is a section that can be further enlarged, so that, for example, you include here persons who may, and it's a general comment that we have in St. Lucia, persons are usually unwilling to come forward because you call the police to report a crime and the criminal is coming to your home soon after to say, well, so why are you calling the police on me? Because nothing remains confidential. Now, I noticed that there is the provision for making or taking an oath of confidence. But again, I think we need to enlarge the offenses that might apply where persons break that oath and reveal the identity of whistleblowers, or in other way reveal the information regarding or surrounding an investigation. Mr. President, those are the comments I have in particular on the bill. And as I said in the beginning, I believe that, and I think you will hear it continually, there can be no contestation that corruption is something that we must fight against. It's something that we must make every effort that we can to stem. Otherwise, St. Lucia will not progress as a society. The impact on our development will be too great. So we need to take all steps that we can to ensure that we limit, remove, and reverse corrupt activities wherever it occurs. And for that reason, I support the bill. As usual, the proof will be in the eating. So we will have to see and ensure that the requisite resources are given to the special prosecutor, so that when they are in place, they don't become just another figurehead like the Integrity Commission or the Parliamentary Commissioner, who has a nicely protected role. They can't be touched, they can, but they don't have the resources to carry out their duties effectively. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Shari.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing my need to make my contribution to the bill before us. I beg that you bear with me a little. I'm not feeling very well this morning, but it would be remiss of me as a young person and part of the governance of this country not to lend my voice to the bill before us. Mr. President, this special prosecutor bill, in my opinion, brings many things into perspective. And since the announcement, since the bill started circulating, we've heard a lot of debate from many quarters of St. Lucia, which in my opinion has been very beneficial to strengthening the legislation before us. It is obvious from what we've seen and what we've heard that this piece of legislation has garnered much interest across the length and breadth of St. Lucia, because for so long we have been marred with allegations of corrupt acts by public officials, public officers, politicians. And so it is of interest to the people of St. Lucia to know that there is a government who is willing to walk that walk in terms of ensuring that that type of behavior is eliminated in the landscape of our island. Mr. President, I listened to the leader of opposition business, and he made a comment that it appears that this is simply an election campaign promise that the government is seeking to fulfill. Mr. President, it's always interesting to listen to the leader of opposition business on the comments that he makes sometimes, because it is this very leader of opposition business who has so many times chastised this administration for not paying the alleged promised $1,500. So in one end of his breath, he speaks of keeping election promises, and in the other breath, when this government comes to the people, comes to the house comes to the parliament to do just that, to do justice to the things that the people have been clamoring for as a nation, it seems that it is still not enough. And so sometimes he really gets me twisted in my head because it is very confusing to follow his trend of thought sometimes. Mr. President, whilst the leader of opposition business was making his comments, I heard a comment fly through the room. No, when the leader of government business, was making his presentation, and he indicated that the leader of this country, Prime Minister Honorable Philip J. Pierre, at every opportunity he gets, reminds the men and women around him that they have a duty to this country to be fair, to be honest, to ensure that they operate above board. Mr. President, I heard the comment that apparently he does not trust them. Mr. President, I am a parent of 2 children. And when I caution my children, Mr. President, it is not because I do not trust them. It is because as a parent, I have a duty to ensure that I keep my children on the straight and narrow. And so I remind them constantly that they are to be honest, that they are to be helpful, that they are to share, that they are to care. It's not because I think they are greedy and uncaring, but because as the parent, I am the shepherd of that flock. And I have a responsibility to ensure that these children become outstanding citizens of this country. And so I am quite appalled by the comment that it appears that the reason the Prime Minister continues to remind the men and women in his cabinet and around him that they are to operate above board is because he is suspicious or non-trusting of him. These types of statements have no place in this honorable house, Mr. President, and it has no place in the landscape of St. Lucia. What message are we sending out to the people who are in leadership positions in this country? Mr. President, we hear so often of malfeasance, of misfeasance, of corruption. We listen to debacles on political platforms and in the parliament and in the street corners and in the market and everywhere, Mr. President. And the word corruption, like you can't buy your party pose fake, you can't vote, you can't point. We hear this so often, Mr. President. And I think as a country, we have a duty and a responsibility to the people of this country, Mr. President, to ensure that we deal with these matters and we deal with it once and for all. Mr. President, as an individual who grew up in a single parent family, a middle class family, an average family, Mr. President, I understand and I empathize with other people within the bracket that I am in, who are the ones who pay for the atrocities and the sins of public officers, public officials, and politicians when they engage in corrupt or alleged corrupt acts. Mr. President, the monies and the resources of this country that are allegedly plundered are at the expense of the poor, the indigent, the single mothers, the low-income earners of this country, Mr. President. Because these resources, and we understand that we are in a country with very scarce resources, Mr. President. These are resources that could otherwise be used to fix a road, to staff a school, to put resources in a hospital, and so on, Mr. President. And it is at the expense of the poor who cannot afford to go to public doctors and public hospitals, but who are robbed short of proper care in a public hospital in this country, Mr. President. And children of parents who cannot afford books and resources for their children, who otherwise could have been assisted by central government programs, Mr. President, they are robbed of these opportunities because resources are used in the wrong way in this country. And as a government, Mr. President, this is where the sole or the first responsibility starts, to ensure that there are policies and procedures in place to curb that type of behavior, and so that the average citizen like me, Mr. President, can be able to access better facilities and better resources in this country of ours, Mr. President. Mr. President, moi vle di sa en patois, because moi vle asi tout moun, tout coin Saint-Lucie, ka point ça moi ka dire monsieur président. Monsieur président, les corruption faite en dans un pays, les l'argent et ressources, richesse pays a ka servir dans qualité manière ça là monsieur président. C'est ti malheureux à monsieur président. C'est maman et papa qui ka lever issue par koyon dans kay là. C'est ça qui pas ka travail monsieur président. C'est pas ça qui pas ni l'argent pour faire any bagay yo vle, any manière yo vle. Yo c'est moun là qui ka piger plus les situations ça là présenter koyo monsieur président. Because l'argent et ressources pays ça là monsieur président. Ça servi pour mettre équipement dans l'hôpital, so ça machin dans l'hôpital et pour ça faire un test même si on ni tout l'argent même si on pas ni si pas ça aller en dedans docteur à côté un docteur privé. Monsieur président, c'est l'argent ça là et ressources ça là supposé servir pour mettre teacher dans l'école, banc dans l'école, desk dans l'école. So maman ça aller en dedans caille l'école et que ça confortable et que ça apprendre monsieur président. Because c'est maman ça là qui caille en position de main pour guider le pays ça en manière unique pour aller. Et moi je veux bout en de caille ça là dit à monsieur président et dit moi supporter toute législation qui devant nous because ça il caille fait en manière il présenter c'est il caille reduce il caille menacer c'est ça là il caille mener descendre monsieur président et ça caille mine c'est ressource ça là c'est l'argent ça là caille ça servi pour really me impact en les pays cette ici monsieur président. Mr. President, corrupt public officials and officers, and I heard the member, the independent senator just before me, referred to that type of behavior like a cancer, Mr. President. Some sort of terminal illness that is robbing the country of living to its full life. Plain and simple, this is what it is. Like a terminal disease, like a thief in the night, coming to plunder the possibilities of the people of this country, generation after generation. And a serious government who cares, Mr. President, for the people would understand, like I indicated, that there must be measures in place not to drag down public officials and public officers and politicians, not to drag their name down the drain, but to protect the interests of the citizens, the hard-working citizens of this country. And so this is why this people-centered government is seeking to do just that. And like I said, and I have been in rooms as well, where in spaces where I've heard the Honorable Prime Minister do just what I indicated before, that he says to the men and women around them that you must never forget the purpose for which you are in office. He says it all the time. And I, as a young person, Mr. President, I cannot speak to any other Prime Minister who perhaps have done it, because perhaps I have not been in a space with them where I can attest to the fact that they've said it. But I can attest to this Honorable Prime Minister in the person of Honorable Philip J. Pierre. He says it all the time. And for me, walking into a space or sitting around a table with the Honorable Philip J. Pierre and hearing the passion in his voice when he speaks to that matter, Mr. President, it brings me great hope that there is some sense of hope for the future of this country when it comes to political life, especially, Mr. President. For too long, the people of this country look upon politicians like thieves and liars and voles and all sorts of things, Mr. President. And they have a responsibility, we have a responsibility as persons within the frame of public and within the frame of governance to ensure that we do not support that type of behavior. Mr. President, in another life, during the period of, say, 2012 thereabout, I served on the Constituency Council of Beaufort North. Again, Mr. President, there was a lot of speculation in terms of incidents and things that had happened within that council, led at the time by an individual with partisan political aspirations. And I am not one who is quick to judge or quick to point fingers, Mr. President. And so I heard and I questioned. I had conversations with the individual in question, because the individual and I have a line of communication. And I asked, and I I tried to gather the information. Because, Mr. President, like I indicated before, I understood too well that if in fact these things that were alleged were actually happening, I understood how it negatively affected the constituency in which I live. Mr. President, I live in a community that doesn't have motorable roads. I live in a community that at some point had bad playing fields and all sorts of things. And Mr. President, when I heard of these happenings, these occurrences, it troubled me. But it was not until I became a member of the council, a councillor on the board of councillors, that it really started to sink in, Mr. President, in terms of some of the things that were questionable happening within that council, Mr. President. I do not want to delve very deep into them. I think that a few years ago, and I think somebody before me indicated that, sometimes these investigations and these reports are made and they sit there. And so it brings to mind immediately the Town and Village report of 2000 that was published between the 2011-2016 period. And Mr. President, like I indicated, perhaps I cannot speak of the happenings in other councils around the island. But there is one example when I saw the documents in the office of the council, Mr. President. And I remember these days so many years ago, like it was just yesterday, that I was seated at a board meeting, and the chairperson of the council on the day announced that the board of councillors would have gone into the council office on a particular date to look at the files and so on of the council. And I remember clearly when she said that, knowing that there had been a lot of talk and a lot of allegations, I shook my head because I figured, boy, she just made a very big mistake. She should not have announced that we would have, as a board of councillors, that we would have gone in and look at the instruments and the documents of the council. And so some of us suggested that we did not go in on the particular date, but that we go in on a prior or subsequent date. And that's exactly what we did, Mr. President. And I remember clearly walking into the office with my colleague councillors, and we indicated to the clerk at the time that we had come to look at the documents, and we asked for staff files and we asked for project files and so on. And the clerk vehemently detested it, Mr. President. And so, of course, it begged again the question of whether the allegations were perhaps correct. Why is it that a clerk, an officer of the government of St. Lucia would have had issues with the board of councillors of the council, Mr. President, coming in to review the files of the council, a relatively new council coming in? Of course you want to know what has been done, what's pending, where you're going. The next thing we know, the director responsible for local government was called, and we were reported to have come into the office seeking files, Mr. President. And I remember very clearly seeing a file, Mr. President, that indicated that a young lady from the community of Vigie, where I am from, and Mr. President, Vigie is a relatively small community. There is not much that happens in that community that you don't know at some point. That a contract had been awarded to a contractor to install pipe-borne water for that young lady, Mr. President. That the pipes had been bought from a particular supplier, and the contract had been issued to the supplier. Lo and behold, Mr. President, unfortunately, a few years later, that young lady lost her house by fire. And up to today, Mr. President, I will continue to say that perhaps if in fact she had had pipe-borne water at her house, the residents of the community perhaps would have been able to put that blaze under some sort of control, because there would have been water in that house that they could have been used. But there was no water. There was no water. She lost her house many years later by fire, and there was no pipe-borne water, but there was a contract issued to run pipes and connect water for that lady. But yet still a town and village council report is taking dust somewhere. And I'm not afraid to stand up here and say it, and I know perhaps there are eyebrows and so on, because the report was put together under previous SLP administration. There is no bones about that. There is no running away from the reality of it. That is where it was done. And then perhaps like the independent senator indicated, perhaps the resources, I do not know what the reason was, to do what was necessary to ensure that we could have followed up on these things and ensure that if in fact what was indicated in the report was how it was presented, that these persons were made to pay for the atrocities, Mr. President. Mr. President, I could think of so many things that we could use these plundered monies or these whatever happens to the resources to do. Being in the fishing industry, and I know I think it was at the last sitting, the leader of opposition business pointed out Senator Shallery to speak about the fishers. So I'm going to speak about the fishers today, Mr. President, in relation to this bill, because I can readily indicate so many avenues that resources of this country can be used to alleviate the plight of fishers in this country. The fishers have been clamoring for the entire existence, for a pension scheme, for example. These resources can be used to do things like that, Mr. President. And so when I indicated before that it is the poor people of this country who suffer the most when monies are unaccounted for, or when contracts are pampered, or when monies are used for things that are questionable and so on. These are some of the things. After school programs for our children, like I said, better equipped hospitals, support systems of single mothers. These are the things that these resources can be used for, Mr. President. And so we must, as a country, take a stand against this thing. Mr. President, if we go to section 26 of the Act, and the independent senator spoke a lot about, or a bit about, whistleblowers. And when we go to section 26, Mr. President, it speaks to protection of persons making a complaint. And this section, I think this section is quite important, and this bill could not be what, in terms of its intention, if it did not give some level of protection to persons making complaints, Mr. President. And even in speaking about that, Mr. President, we know that we've heard in terms of talks of corruption, like I said, whether it's on the political platforms or in the House, that sometimes you get senior public officials in government departments, permanent secretaries, accountants, and so on, who indicate to you that they acted because they got a directive from somebody above them. And sometimes they do not report it, or they simply follow through, because there is a fear in terms of their job security, Mr. President. And so I think that this section of the bill is so important, because it now gives people like that the ability to feel comfortable in a space that if they do feel that whatever they're asking, that they are asked to do is not in keeping, or it's not right, they feel that it's wrong, they feel that it's illegal, that they can seek some sort of reprieve, and they are protected by that section, Mr. President. Mr. President, the time has come for it not to be simply name-calling and finger-pointing, but a time to act. And too often there is a lot of talk about things that should, perhaps, and so on. But then the action and the support is very important, Mr. President. Mr. President, when you go around and you listen, especially to young people, they are either drawn to political life or public life because they feel that politics is for persons with loose behavior who have a get-rich-fast mentality, because there is not these sort of systems to reprimand and so on the behaviors of especially politicians, Mr. President. Or you get young persons who simply tell you they're staying away from it because they do not want to be associated with that, or ascribe to what we have come to label politicians and persons of that class with, Mr. President. But there are persons in this country who have a deep, innate desire to serve the country, Mr. President. And so I think a piece of legislation of that magnitude, together with some of the others that have existed, and we always talk about the need to educate people about the legislations and so on, and I think that is so important, not just for this new piece of legislation, but even for some that are in existence. We need to educate people, we need to let people know what it is and what sort of reprieve they have under it, and what they can do and what it's intended to do. But there are people, like I said, who are simply patriotic, and they are guided by rules and regulations, and they want to serve their country in particular capacities. And I think this piece of legislation, with its intention, will really entice persons who fall into that category to not stay away from political life and public service, Mr. President. Mr. President, the time has come where it is no longer okay for me or for anybody to stand on one side of this House of Parliament and to throw and cast aspersions on persons, colleagues within the same parliamentary, within the same House of Parliament. I mean, over the past years, over the past 6 or 7 years, 6 years, thereabout, we've heard a lot of things. And whereas some may, and it has been said, that some feel that this piece of legislation is simply an attempt to go after particular people. I remember some time ago, Mr. President, listening to a debate on a piece of legislation, the amendment to the Crown Proceedings Bill, and these same aspersions were spewed that the intent of the then administration, led by the now leader of opposition, was intended for just that purpose, to go after certain people. So, of course, perhaps the reason why the leader of opposition business can speak fluently and eloquently that perhaps this piece of legislation is intended to do that is because he knew quite well, having been a part of that cabinet then, apparently understood that that is why that piece of legislation was amended. I mean, I can't take that away from him. He knows what he knows, and so perhaps. But I will continue to say, Mr. President, that this piece of legislation is intended not simply to fulfill a political promise, Mr. President, but it is for the people of this country to feel comfortable and to know that the government of this country, successive administrations, Mr. President, is concerned that there is a reduction or zeroing of the occurrences or alleged occurrences of corruption in this country, Mr. President. We have heard a lot of talk about the Corruption Perception Index, Mr. President, and this is an important index, because I'm pretty sure perhaps Independent Senator Aziz will agree with me when I say that when persons are looking to invest in the tourism sector and when individuals are looking for a tourism destination, perhaps these are some of the things that they look at. Investors look at these things, they look at the Corruption Perception Index. And so as a country, we must be able to show some level of slate in, like I said, not just talking the talk, but doing what needs to be done to change that environment and to change the perception of potential investors to this country, Mr. President. When you look at the Corruption Perception Index, Mr. President, it says that it measures how corrupt a country is, how corrupt the public sector of a country is perceived to be, and it is one of the most widely used corruption index in the world. The data is said to be collected from different surveys and assessment and collected by a variety of reputable institutions such as the World Bank and the World Economic Forum. Mr. President, if we look at the history of St. Lucia, we have a lot of projects and a lot of agreements that have been signed and projects that have been funded by institutions such as the World Bank. And so when you look at a Corruption Perception Index, and then we understand that some of the information collected to determine your positioning or your ranking in terms of corruption, the corruption perception, some of that information is derived from reputable institutions such as the World Bank. It is telling, Mr. President, it is very telling where we find ourselves on that line, Mr. President. Mr. President, Section 2 of the bill looks at the interpretation, defines corrupt conduct, and the schedule further highlights what are the behaviors that are considered or understood to be corrupt conduct, Mr. President. And I want to appeal to persons who hold public office to ensure that they understand what these mean. Although I see perhaps a whole other a whole other turnaround of things, Mr. President, because every time you put legislation in place, you put rules and regulations in place, people who are hell-bent on doing things in a particular way, and people who are hell-bent on breaking the laws, they find ways around it, Mr. President. But I am confident that, like we have indicated before, yes, there is a director of public prosecution, but like in the submission of the independent senator, office of the director of public prosecution who has the responsibility for a broad spectrum of prosecution, Mr. President. And so I think that the focus, the specialization, and those of us who are involved in businesses and so on, we understand, even within a family, we understand that you assign particular roles to particular people, and that level of specialization, Mr. President, creates greater efficiency, Mr. President. And I think this is what this intends to do, to create that greater level of specialization, and so to bring greater focus to actually doing what needs to be done, the investigation, the prosecution, and so on, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I close, a question was thrown across the room in terms of the US visa. And apparently it seemed to be, based on the submission of the leader of opposition, it seems to be an indicator of your character, your something, I don't know. I do not own a US visa. And I'm trying to figure out, boy, if it's because, what is the reason I don't own one? Growing up in a single parent family, Mr. President, this was not a priority for my mother. It could not have been a priority for my mother to pay a couple $100 to even get me a passport. I got a passport when I started working. I applied for a St. Lucian passport. And so I did not have access to a passport, far less a US visa. And I have not up to now have a need to apply for a US visa. And so I am not ashamed to say that I am not a holder of a US visa. I have not had a reason to travel to the US. And perhaps when I do have a reason to travel to the US, I will then make an application for a US visa. But I think it is absurd that we are going to use that as a criteria to determine whether you are of proper standing or not. Some of us really have not had a need, or we can't afford it. I am not ashamed to say that at that time my mother could not even afford to apply for a St. Lucian passport for me, because the priority was putting food on the table and ensure that I got the proper education, Mr. President.
And remember, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so, Mr. President, I think I am learning so much sitting around this table, and all type of learning is good learning, because you learn the bad that you then learn to dispel, and you learn the good that you then learn to apply to your everyday life. And so it is a learning experience, and some of the things that are thrown across the table are really, it really does. And so sometimes I ask myself, if it does that to me, what sort of emotion it evokes in the other average St. Lucians, Mr. President, who perhaps don't even have an opportunity to speak about how they feel about them, Mr. President. And so with this very short submission, Mr. President, I want to reiterate my support for the bill before us, Mr. President. But like the independent senator who went before me, to implore the government that the execution and the success of this office of a special prosecutor, depends a lot on independence of the office of the special prosecutor, as well as resource allocation, Mr. President. These two things, I think, are very important to the success of this venture, and it is very important in its actualization to ensure that as a country we can now feel comfortable in knowing that we are putting things in place to stamp out the acts of corruption in this country, and to be able to use the resources of this country to the greater benefit of the citizens of this country. With this, Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Senator Polius.
No, I think I'll do it after. Sure. Some minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to make my submission on this piece of legislation dubbed the Special Prosecutor Bill. But before I delve into my presentation, Mr. President, please permit me leave to wish someone who's very, very special to my heart a happy birthday. My earthly queen, my mother, who celebrates her 75th birthday today.
Senator, for a while I thought you were referring to me.
No, you are not a queen. Good.
That is before you said queen.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this bill is being enacted in an effort to stamp out corruption. And we have heard the very same echoed by other members who have gone before me. It's in an attempt to stamp out corruption and misconduct by public officers and public officials in St. Lucia. A small developing state that continues to grapple with a multiplicity of social ills, not forgetting the escalating crime rate. A small developing state that remains committed to building and preserving its reputable image on the international stage. We understand, Mr. President, the need to deal with the political transgressions in order to change how the public perceives a politician. There is need for that. And just by way of illustration, Mr. President, when I decided to enter into active politics, I was cautioned by so many dear friends and acquaintances alike. Not that they believed that I would turn out to be a bad apple like the rest of the bunch, but because the commonly repeated refrain, politics is for the bad guys, politics is nasty, politicians are corrupt, that remained etched in their minds. And they feared that perhaps my good intentions and character would be transformed into one of corruption and crookedness. But Mr. President, knowing the grassroots and not easily discouraged person that I am, and the principled person that I am too, I knew that perhaps my entry into politics would signal to many, including young women who aspire to become politicians, that politics is indeed for the good and not for the bad and the ugly, but for people with good repute, those who are desirous in making a difference in society, those who are committed to improving the lives of the people they represent and by extension, the citizens of this country. Mr. President, I want to state emphatically that politics was not designed for the scandalous, those with questionable character, or for those who are of the conviction that their political office gives them the license to victimize, to threaten and to exploit others, and to engage in all sorts of corruption and misconduct as defined and outlined in this piece of legislation. Mr. President, we understand the need to build a better St. Lucia for all St. Lucians, both here and in the diaspora. To build a better St. Lucia, there is need to change perceptions held by many regarding governance. There is need to restore people's confidence in the legislative system of this country. And more importantly, Mr. President, there is need to maintain democracy at all levels, and not to instill fear or keep people silent when they want to voice their concerns and to talk about those actions and indecisions of leaders in office or policies of government that affect them, that negatively impact them. This is a democratic state, Mr. President, and no one in this country, and I repeat, Mr. President, no one should be muzzled by any politician or threatened in any way, because each of us must enjoy the democratic right and freedom of expression. Mr. President, I am indeed relieved that this piece of legislation, if implemented with transparency, will seek to hold all public officials and public officers accountable for their misconduct. So we on this side of the House support this legislation, because we understand the need to hold them accountable. We understand the need to ensure that persons who have engaged in corruption or persons who have engaged in inappropriate, improper actions, they are held accountable. And I'm happy that this piece of legislation will do just that. So we support it. We do support it. Mr. President, I listened to the debate in the lower house, and the Prime Minister tried to convey the message that this special prosecutor bill is not intended to come after anyone. While others explicitly stated that as soon as the office of the special prosecutor is established, they will be the first to lodge complaints about some members of the former administration.
Exactly.
Well, I have news for this government. I have news for this government.
Don't try to spin it.
Once
Don't try to spin and defend it.
there is substantial, and listen, once there is substantial and irrefutable evidence to confirm the allegations of corruption regarding members of the former administration, you have the green light.
That's right.
By all means, you need to do what you must. After all, this bill, the special prosecutor bill, has given you the authority to prosecute. Yes, it's the green light. And I'm hoping that it will be implemented not just for a few, but for all. I want to urge this government, Mr. President.
That's right, for all.
Because, you know, there is a tendency for us to point this finger at this one and that one. But what we fail to realize, Mr. President, is that sometimes when we do point fingers, we don't realize that there are so many other fingers being pointed at us. So as my colleague indicated earlier, we need to take a good look at the mirror. Take a good look and let us start with us. Start with the cabinet. Mr. President, the bill defines corrupt conduct in relation to public officers and public officials in several ways, all of which I need not go into. But Mr. President, the one definition to which I would like to make specific reference, and I think this is on page, is it on page 16? Page 17. Page 17 is D, and I quote. So we're looking at what corrupt conduct means. D, abusing his or her real or supposed influence to obtain an undue advantage for himself or herself or for another person, unquote. And more pertinent, Mr. President, E, misbehavior in public office. Mr. President, according to Section 2 of the bill, undue advantage, that is on page 7. Undue advantage means a benefit obtained from unlawful or improper actions. Right there, Mr. President, the bill acknowledges that sometimes the actions of public officials or officers may not necessarily be unlawful or illegal, but rather improper, inappropriate, by dint of the fact that these officers are holding public offices. So, Mr. President, if corruption will not be tolerated, and we really want to eradicate corruption at all levels, every form of it, I don't stand for it. Yeah. But if it is to be tolerated, if it should not be tolerated, as articulated by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, and echoed by the leader of government business, then it is imperative, Mr. President, that this government gets the ball rolling.
That's right.
Get the ball rolling. Start by investigating the many allegations of misconduct and corruption right there in the cabinet.
That's right.
Start right there. Now we are saying they are alleged allegations, alleged corruption, allegations of misconduct. I don't have the evidence. Leader, I'm not mentioning names. When we take a good look at the mirror, we see.
That's right.
We see the evidence lies before us.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
The member appears to be imputing improper motives against members of cabinet. In as much as she did not specify any specific example, but she has just stated that the Prime Minister should investigate allegations of corruption among his cabinet members. And if she has information,
Senator Fede, please.
Yes. So I think I have a right to be heard in silence, Mr. President. Thank you. Since she has just made the statement that the Prime Minister should investigate corruption, allegations of corruption among members of his cabinet, I wish for her to indicate what they are, and if she cannot indicate what they are, she should not infer by that statement that they are members of cabinet that should be investigated for corruption.
The contract, security contract that the vendors are. Who has it?
Senator, I do not agree with you that aspersions are being cast. There are allegations that have been leveled on both sides of the political divide.
Thank you.
The allegations does not refer to any one person. They are merely alleged allegations. Yes, you did say that you want her to specify what these alleged allegations are. But because in my opinion, that it does not, aspersions are not being cast with respect to any particular person, I do not believe that we have to perpetuate this line of reasoning. So you may continue.
Thank you so much,
We're moving on.
Mr. President. Yes, we are moving on.
Pressure.
We are. You know, we sometimes we just need to face the music. Face it. We are moving on. Furthermore, Mr. President, I want to caution this government to be careful what it wishes for.
Yes.
Because, you know, Mr. President, karma has a way of working, you know.
That's right.
Sometimes when it comes back to us, it comes back with a vengeance. So be careful.
Yes.
Sometimes the very same piece of legislation that has been conveniently crafted, not that we are opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it at all. Because I believe that whether you are in opposition or in government, those allegations need to be investigated. And this is not a political statement, this is a political statement. No preference for any side.
That's right.
Because we need to convey to the people of St. Lucia that we are serious about governance, and that our characters or our dispositions are of reputable characters. Our dispositions are trustworthy. They can depend on us. They can trust us. This is what we need to be able to demonstrate to the people of St. Lucia. So it doesn't matter on which side of the house you are. We know very well that today you sit on this side and tomorrow you may be on the other side. Politics is cyclical. We know that. Mr. President, I hope that when the office of the special prosecutor is established, that this special prosecutor will go to the source of the evidence. The source. Not depend predominantly on second-hand information, but go to the various districts, constituencies, communities, and homes, if necessary, where the truth, where the evidence lies. We're talking about a thorough, comprehensive investigation. It's needed. And it should be free from political interference. Mr. President, in closing, I just want to place on record that I look forward, and there are many of us who await investigations into alleged, and not the operating word there, leader of the opposition, alleged corruption, leader of government business, sorry, alleged corruption, misconduct, or improper actions of some members. We await this. Across the board. If my colleague has been involved in any sort of corruption, and upon investigation he is found guilty, he needs to be held accountable.
That's right.
He needs to be held accountable. And this is what we're saying. Mr. President, residents of some communities like Dennery North are impatiently waiting investigations into the corrupt conduct of the representative and public officers like the clerk and chairman of the constituency council. We are awaiting, and I want to register my support for this bill, Mr. President, finally, and hope that it is implemented in a transparent way with no political interference. I thank you. It's always alleged, you know.
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I stand to offer my support to this bill that is before us at this time, the Special Prosecutor Bill. But before I do so, Mr. President, I asked for your leeway to extend condolences to the family members of the former Speaker, Alce, and also to wish our former clerk, Ms. Lindell Gustav, a happy retirement and all the best as she continues her journey in life. May it be an exciting one for her after having worked so hard. And of course, congratulations to our lady, Julian Alfred, as well as the team who participated in the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. I want to also extend hearty congratulations to the government of St. Lucia and the people of St. Lucia, especially the Rastafarian community and the arts fraternity, cultural groups, artists, CDF, for this wonderful celebration of Emancipation Day, which was executed on the holiday Monday. Mr. President, it was refreshing. It was exhilarating. It touched my spirit. Because as an educator, once an educator, always an educator. As an educator in primary school, Mr. President, I taught history. And I will never forget my students in a dramatic presentation trying to present the group in theater when the slaves were told that they were free. And I remember a particular student jumping around the classroom. Her name is Anselma Joseph, and she recently celebrated her birthday. Jumping around the classroom shouting, "Freedom! Freedom!" Mr. President, this child was in her element. And I swear, she was there on the fields with our forefathers when we got emancipated. So I think our forefathers, our ancestors were proud of us for that celebration. It was a good start, never before seen in this country. And I pray and I ask that we continue to make them proud of us, not only in celebrating, but also in the way we live each day to continue to be free in our spirit, in our minds, in our person. Mr. President, I wish to quote, as I start my presentation on the bill, Alice O'Connor, a Russian-born American writer. Her right name, her pen name, was Ayn Rand, A-Y-N, pronounced Ayn Rand, a writer and philosopher who indicates, when the law no longer protects you from the corrupt, but protects the corrupt from you, you know your nation is doomed. I repeat, when the law no longer protects you from the corrupt, but protects the corrupt from you, you know your nation is doomed. Mr. President, this bill, this special prosecutor bill, is in the public interest, meaning it is for the welfare and well-being of the general public, pays St. Lucie, the people of St. Lucia, because it shall lead to the investigation and prosecution of the dishonest use of public funds. Public funds meaning money belonging to the people of St. Lucia. And Mr. President, if all the gung-ho, back and forth, and be careful what we investigate, Mr. President, there's no need for all of this, you know. Once you tamper with the people's money, Mr. President, deal with that. That's clear. That's as simple. There's no rocket science in this. Once you use or mismanage the people's money, you have to account. Regardless of who you are, where you come from, what side you are on, you have to account. And this is what the bill is saying clearly. There is no need to quarrel. There's no need to fuss. There's no need to fight. There's no need to say karma. Mr. President, what is happening here? Okay? And it's about public officials or public officers. And I may add, people who should know better. If it's found that any public officer or any public official is found to have mismanaged the funds of the people of the country, of course deal with that, Mr. President. Once people are at that level in the country, we ought to know better. If we are found guilty, means we did it. So deal with it. In the preliminary section, the section 3 states, page 7, that this act does not affect the authority of a few of them, but I want to specifically deal with the DPP and the Attorney General. The DPP under section 73 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, cap 1.01, and another enactment, and B, the Attorney General, to prosecute a civil claim or discontinue or withdraw a civil claim on behalf of the government. Mr. President, contrary to the submissions of the opposition, the legislation shall not take over the functions of these offices, but rather provide dedicated, specific focus on the prosecution for corrupt conduct as referred to in the schedule of the bill. Mr. President, we must consider that the Director of Public Prosecutions and his office have a multitude of criminal matters being prosecuted or to prosecute, as we heard earlier from Senator Diddley. Offenses such as drug crimes, money laundering, homicides, sex crimes, theft crimes, traffic offenses, and the like. They are bombarded, Mr. President. Also consider the Attorney General's office. They too have a multitude of civil matters before the courts, such as defamation, breach of contract, negligence resulting in injury or death, etc., etc. Mr. President, our government has highlighted a targeted focus on investigating and prosecuting for corrupt conduct of a public officer or public official. It is imperative to have a special prosecutor and an administrative staff to adequately conduct the work proposed in the bill. The work, Mr. President, there might be a lot of work for this special prosecutor. And the small team, very efficient but small team, there might be so much to investigate. It might be too numerous to mention. But you know what, Mr. President? The people of St. Lucia demand answers. And I heard Senator Polyus asking for investigations. And it's beautiful because the bill speaks to the fact that anyone can write to the special prosecutor and indicate that they have a case, they have information, and they wish to submit, so the special prosecutor can investigate. So instead of sitting here or standing here and telling who to investigate, put pen to paper and do this quickly. Once this is initiated by the office of the Ministry of the Public Service and advised by the Attorney General, quick and in a hurry, right to the special prosecutor, and investigation starts. There is no brouhaha about this, Mr. President. Simple.com. As I continue, Mr. President, Section 8, subsection 3. The DPP can refer matters to the special prosecutor which cannot be withdrawn except with the DPP's consent. And under the powers of the special prosecutor, subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecutions under Section 73 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, the special prosecutor may perform any function in relation to the institution, carrying on, and withdrawal of a prosecution for an offense against the laws of St. Lucia, and may prosecute a matter in his or her own name. 2. Where the special prosecutor institutes a prosecution against a person, the special prosecutor may withdraw the matter, and the court shall discharge the defendant. Just like in court. 3. The special prosecutor shall not withdraw a matter instituted or referred to him or her by the Director of Public Prosecutions unless the Director of Public Prosecutions consents in writing. So there's always a paper trail. The evidence will always be there. No matter what people may think, we will do this with transparency. There will be everything above board to be done. Additionally, the bill is for public officers and public officials. The Constitution of St. Lucia defines a public officer as a person holding or acting in any public office, and a public office is defined as any office of emolument in the public service. In the public service. Therefore, Mr. President, let us be cognizant that St. Lucia is a small island state where many people can be related or connected. So this bill, by appointing a special prosecutor, is especially helpful because, for example, an allegation against a sitting public officer or official can be handled by a special prosecutor rather than a prosecutor within the DPP's chambers, who would or could be in the position of investigating their superiors or persons at that level of the executive, which can be very intimidating, depending on the power and might being wielded or exercised by that public officer or official. Can somebody within the DPP's office, a prosecutor, investigate his or her superior? It's only within the special prosecutor's office that this can be done. So there is no fear, there is no intimidation. Once the evidence is presented, the investigation proceeds. This is what we want. No stoppage, no intimidation, just a clear-cut investigation to find out to show accountability in this country. Part 2 of the bill, section 24, speaks of prevention of corrupt conduct. Prevention. And Mr. President, it says in section 2, part 1, a public officer or a public official shall not engage in corrupt conduct. A public officer or public official shall not engage in corrupt conduct. 2A and B, page 14. If charged or convicted, there's a liable fine of $300,000 or imprisonment for 5 years or both. Mr. President, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Public officers, public officials know that. They ought not to engage in corrupt conduct. So if an investigation is to be lodged, have no fear. Because we all know that we ought not to engage in corrupt conduct. There should be no fear, no anxiety, nothing at all. Just let the office of the special prosecutor be installed, set up, and the work gets done. Because around the table in this room, I have heard that we all agree in one voice that St. Lucia is going down the wrong path. And it has been so for a few years. It's time to clean up this mess. It is time to do what is necessary to make St. Lucia Saint Lucia. Not like Lucia and Helen. We want a clean country where there is good governance. There is accountability. There is honesty. There's integrity in public office. We want that. So unanimously together, we are pushing for that. So even I heard the leader of the opposition warning public servants, etc. Yes, they must be warned that they ought not to engage in corrupt conduct. It is there. They must be warned. Be warned. Because, Mr. President, if a public officer allows any official to push their hand or to make them or to bribe them to do, at the end of the day, they will have to pay and face the consequences. When we work in the public office, we have to stand our ground on principle. We must. Because, Mr. President, there is a Creole phrase, si pani si tu es pani vole. Si mwen sabou san vole kou vin mande mwen pou fan bagay ba ou, makay situe ou. Depi se vole, fey pa kou, mwen pakay situe ou. So when they come for me, what defense do I have? Stand on principle. That's what I say to the public officers in this country. Mr. President, in my last presentation in this chamber on the Firearm Amendment Bill, I quoted the Italian criminologist and philosopher, politician, Cesare Beccaria, and he posited that government should work to prevent crime rather than focus on punishment, unquote. He stated more, that legislation is not about punishing people, but to serve as a deterrent, unquote. That the penalties, the laws will make public officers and public officials think twice about mismanaging the funds of the people of this country. That is what this legislation is about. It's sending a clear message to public officers and public officials, gone and to come. You mess with the funds of this country, somebody will pay. We are too small. We do not have excess resources. And we can't afford to have people just take and take and take. No, it has to stop. It has to stop. We are sending a clear message with this bill. The people's money. We have to act with integrity. We must work honestly. We must demonstrate accountability. I make no apologies. And whoever gets caught, it could be my nenen, Mr. President. Go for them. Go for them. Anyone. Mr. President Beccaria also stated that the aim of punishment is not to cause pain for the offender, and may I add, family and friends, but to prevent them from doing it again and to prevent other people from committing a crime. It's not to cause pain for the offender, whoever is caught. It's not about causing them discomfort, although I hope they feel discomfort. But it's to send a message to the young people of this country who think they can just jump into the public service straight out of college and just become rich overnight and nothing to account. No. No. It cannot be like this, Mr. President. We need to make an example of the few people in our country who are doing it. Beccaria believes in punishment, that the punishment should be certain and it should be swift. And I see here in the bill, it speaks to that. 300,000, sometimes in the case of million, or both, 300,000 or imprisonment. Mr. President, 300,000 even too small. Even too small. Because there are some serious matters to be dealt with in this country. I look forward to the Ministry of the Public Service, on advice from the Attorney General, to set up the terms and conditions of employment for the special prosecutor. I say let us act with haste. This is urgent. Ça fait payer, sérieux. L'argent paye, sérieux. And I listened to young Senator Kejiana, and she speaks to growing up as a young person and in a single parent home. She speaks to managing her home, her children, her resources. You understand? And she balances home life, work life, etc. And she sees what kind of example are we setting for a young senator like this. She needs to know when she comes into an appointment like this that it has to be with integrity, accountability. But if she sees public officials doing anything, she will just figure, based on how her mom has raised her, she may not, and another might just do it. It is very easy for our young people to be swayed, Mr. President. It is very easy. We need to stop. And I heard Senator Polius almost sending a little bit of it sounded like a mild threat. In fact, that's how I took it. Be careful what you wish for. Senator Polius is telling the government of St. Lucia, who's trying to implement a bill to fight corruption in the public service, to tell the government, be careful what you wish for. Am I not trying to understand this? And I want to say to my learned colleague, what we wish for is good governance. What we wish for is integrity in public office. What we wish for is transparency. What we wish for is accountability. There's no way to threaten the government about this. This is what the people of St. Lucia voted for and expect. That we govern with integrity and we do what is necessary to make this country a saint again. So I stand here with with no apologies for it. And I stand here not feeling threatened by it, even if it costs me my life. I believe in it. If we cannot stand for anything, we'll fall for anything. We got to stand up for something in this country. Regardless of who appointed us, we've got to stand up and say, if it's wrong, regardless of who it is. Nous pas savons ce que tu es. We need to clean up this mess, Mr. President. Let's be calm. Let the truth guide this process. And I'm happy in section 25 that the complaint to the special prosecutor, that the complaint can be made in writing by anybody who has grounds. Section 26, protection of persons making complaints. Any member of the society who makes a complaint in good faith should and would feel confident and comforted that there shall be no retribution, no vengeance, no punishment, or no litigation, no legal action against them as a result. Good governance must exist in this land. Mr. President, we've come so far to see our small country fall apart because of corruption. We need to do something. And I close with the words again of Alice O'Connor. When the law no longer protects you from the corrupt, but protects the corrupt from you, you know your nation is doomed. Mr. President, our nation, St. Lucia, will not be doomed. Our laws will protect against the corrupt. We will investigate them. We will prosecute them. And we will, if needs be, take back all what they were left with. I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move for suspension of the Senate until 2:40. 1 hour.
Senators, the question is that this House be suspended until 2:40. And I'll put the question. As many as are that opinion, say aye. As many as have a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Eh bien, nous, on est venu au bout de la première session, ça c'est Sénat la jeudi, ça c'est côté, il y a discuté particulièrement ça fait ça avec le special prosecutor. Nous avons commencé ça c'est mardi, ça c'est premier chambre, eh bien niveau gouvernement. Parce que ça n'est pas lower house of assembly, mais ça c'est côté c'est même parlement sur façade, enfin qui électé, il était tenu ça n'est pas enfin il était discuté ça fait ça avec plusieurs différents montées tenus avec à présent ça c'est l'autre là qui a discuté avec enfin discuter même ça so let me say that one in English. We have heard this from this morning. We heard from the presenter, that is the leader of government business, Senator Gubian Ferdinand, and he presented the bill this morning. Followed then the leader of the opposition business, Senator Fede, responded, and of course he discussed the bill, and of course very interesting indeed. Then he was also followed by different, let us see here, he was followed by Senator, after the leader, then we had the senator, the independent senator Lee, who also contributed to the discussion. Then we have had the senator Shalry spoke on to the bill as well. We also had also present contribution from Senate opposition Senator Theophilus, as well as, and of course, ending with Senator Alvina Reynolds. They all made their contributions to the special prosecutor bill. To me, this is la Creole. Nous avons différents monde parler bon matin à ce discussion. Nous tenons comme le chef ça fait gouvernement, ça c'est un sénateur Bibiane Ferdinand qui a commencé. Nous avons aussi sénateur Fédé à ce face à l'opposition qui répond. Avec aussi, nous tenons à ce face à l'opposition, nous tenons des sénateurs Fédé et puis sénateur Polius. Avec à ce façade gouvernement, nous tenons à part du sénateur, ça c'est chef là, nous tenons le sénateur Alvina Reynolds qui est fini, et qu'avant nous tenons face à ce sénateur Charles qui parlait, et aussi nous tenons même, ça c'est sénateur qui est indépendant, un sénateur lui, et aussi parler à ce débat là. Nous avons commencé après-midi, nous avons un petit pause pour déjeuner, avec nous avons dévié à 20 minutes pour 3 heures, si nous supposons tout ça qui marche bien, mais nous allons merci un peu pour rester pour nous, avec nous avons dévié à l'Essala pour voir plus à ce qui s'est passé en session comme Sénat là, ici à Joliet.